The first keynote revolves around the idea that silence enables evil. And this concept is vividly illustrated in the events that unfolded at Betty's diner. The moment the five bikers rode into the parking lot, the atmosphere shifted instantly. The rumble of their motorcycles announced their arrival, a sound that was not merely loud but intended to dominate the space, to signal control and intimidation before they even stepped inside. The diner's regular rhythm, the casual conversations, the clinking of cutlery, the hum of the coffee machine, all of it was abruptly overshadowed by the presence of men who exuded threat. The ordinary people in the diner, accustomed to peaceful routines and mundane interactions, was suddenly confronted with danger that they had no training or expectation to face. Their reactions were predictable, and those reactions became a central illustration of how silence can enable evil. Fear manifested in frozen bodies, hesitant movements, and averted eyes. The businessman closed his laptop, a symbolic retreat into the digital safety of his device, hoping perhaps that if he ignored the situation, he could avoid being implicated or harmed. The truck driver hunched over his coffee, gripping the cup as if the warmth of the mug could shield him from the violent reality encroaching on his space. The family with young children quietly moved toward the exit, the father instinctively placing a protective hand over his family, but without taking action beyond withdrawal. Each person was focused on self-preservation, a natural instinct, yet one that allowed the bikers to escalate their actions with little resistance. The elderly couple, who remained seated, were visibly distressed. The woman's eyes were wide with fear, tears forming at the corners, while the man's hands trembled as he reached for his wallet, perhaps considering an escape or a bribe to ensure their safety. Their inaction, though understandable in context, mirrored a universal truth that when observers remain passive, aggressors are given free rein to push boundaries. The bikers did not need to force their dominance against every individual because the collective silence of the witnesses implicitly granted permission for the abuse to continue. This phenomenon of inaction is magnified in the way Jessica Martinez, the waitress, was treated. She faced escalating harassment that began as crude comments and laughter and quickly turned into physical intimidation. As each man tested the boundaries, they were emboldened not only by the lack of immediate intervention, but also by the visible absence of support from others. Their confidence grew in proportion to the stillness around them, highlighting a psychological pattern where predators measure their power against the perceived willingness of the bystanders to respond. Jessica's pleas, her struggling, her fear were all met with either avoidance or hesitation. The manager, Tom Henderson, approached and attempted to intervene verbally, but his words had little effect. The bikers dismissed his authority, reinforcing the lesson that passive confrontation, or confrontation without risk, is often ineffective against those determined to harm. The moment crystallizes how silence can compound danger. In situations of escalating violence, hesitation, fear, or avoidance communicates indirectly to aggressors that boundaries are malleable and that the potential for punishment or accountability is minimal. It was only when Madison Clark chose to act, when she broke the pattern of silence with deliberate intervention, that the trajectory of violence shifted. Her presence, calm yet decisive, disrupted the implicit permission the bikers had been granted by the passive bystanders. The narrative demonstrates that silence does not merely fail to prevent evil. It actively contributes to its growth. The diner's initial reactions were a microcosm of a broader societal phenomenon, where inaction in the face of wrongdoing allows harm to persist and escalate. Each frozen body, each averted gaze, and each hesitant gesture illustrated a human tendency to defer responsibility, to hope someone else will act, and in doing so, inadvertently became part of the mechanism that enabled the abuse to happen. By the time Madison intervened, the contrast between inaction and decisive action became starkly visible. The bikers' behavior, previously unchecked, was immediately restrained, and the ripple effect was profound. Witnesses who had initially been paralyzed by fear later found the courage to testify. The story captures the importance of individual responsibility in moments of crisis. It portrays silence not as a neutral state, but as a choice that carries consequences, often amplifying the harm inflicted on the vulnerable. The diner's initial silence, driven by fear and social conformity, created an environment where evil could operate unchecked, showing that an action, however understandable, can empower aggressors and exacerbate the suffering of victims. The lesson is clear. Without intervention, hesitation, or passive observation, wrongdoers are left with unchecked power, and the potential for harm increases exponentially. The second keynote focuses on the idea that true strength is calm, not loud, and this is embodied in the character of Madison Clark throughout the events at Betty's diner. From the moment she enters the diner, her presence is unassuming, almost ordinary. Her appearance, casual clothing, minimal makeup, and simple gray Henley jeans, presents her as someone who belongs to the background, someone who would not draw attention or signal danger. This is a deliberate choice, one that reflects a deep understanding of power that is not dependent on visibility or intimidation. In contrast, the five bikers enter the diner with maximum noise and aggression. Their motorcycles announce their presence with a roar. Their boots thud against the linoleum, and their voices carry with brash confidence. They dominate space, spread across tables, and behave as though the diner exists solely for their entertainment. The contrast between their loud, aggressive display and Madison's quiet, controlled demeanor underscores a fundamental principle. Real strength is not in the volume of one's actions or the overt display of force, but in control, precision, and confidence. Madison sits in a corner booth, observing the diner, the entrances, the people, and the patterns of movement. Her awareness is automatic, honed over 12 years of Delta Force operations, ingrained to the point that she processes threats with the same efficiency she once used in combat zones. She does not react immediately to the bikers' intrusion. She does not shout, nor does she create panic or chaos. She watches, calculates, and prepares. Her calm is itself a form of power. It contrasts sharply with the bikers' external aggression, showing that dominance does not always have to be loud or visible. When the bikers begin to harass Jessica Martinez, the waitress, their noise and crude behavior escalate, designed to assert control and intimidate everyone in the room. They rely on the natural human tendency to freeze in the face of threat, to remain silent and compliant. In their minds, loudness equates to strength, and fear in others equates to dominance. Yet their understanding of strength is superficial, dependent on coercion and spectacle rather than skill or discipline. Madison's intervention is a demonstration of the opposite philosophy. She rises from her seat with measured steps, her movements deliberate and unhurried. There is no panic, no adrenaline-fueled recklessness. She approaches the situation with a composed strategy, assessing the positions of the aggressors, the potential risks, and the environment. Her calm allows her to exploit the bikers' overconfidence, to read their intentions, and to respond with surgical precision. When the first physical confrontation occurs, her techniques are efficient and controlled. She applies joint locks, targeted strikes, and leverage-based throws that incapacitate without excessive force. There is no chaotic flailing, no need to overpower with brute strength. The violence is contained, purposeful, and executed with discipline. Her calmness does more than just neutralize the immediate threat. It psychologically unravels the bikers. The loud, aggressive gestures that had previously established dominance are now ineffective against someone whose composure is unwavering. Every punch, kick, and maneuver Madison performs is amplified by the stark contrast to her outwardly calm demeanor. Her strength is not performative. It is real, and it is undeniable. By the end of the confrontation, the bikers are not just physically defeated. They are confronted with the reality that their loudness and intimidation were meaningless against someone who possesses controlled, deliberate, incompetent power. The aftermath continues to highlight this principle. Madison's calm does not end with the fight. She maintains composure while communicating her identity, presenting her credentials, and ensuring the bikers understand the gravity of their actions. Her steady demeanor commands respect and authority without raising her voice or resorting to threats beyond what is necessary. Even the witnesses, initially frozen in fear, are influenced by her composed strength. The elderly couple, the truck driver, And even the manager begin to recognize that true authority and power do not always manifest as noise or aggression. Madison's calm inspires recognition of competence and courage in others. This story reinforces the idea that strength is often internal, measured by control, skill, and the ability to act decisively without chaos. Loudness, aggression, and intimidation are superficial markers of power, but they lack the substance that comes from discipline, awareness, and calculated action. Madison Clark exemplifies this, showing that real strength manifests quietly yet effectively, transforming what could have been a scene of terror into one of order and protection. In essence, the narrative demonstrates that calmness is not a sign of passivity, but a weapon in itself. A form of strength that overpowers noise and aggression by demonstrating mastery over oneself and the environment. Her actions make it clear that control, precision, and confidence are the true measures of power, and that quiet strength can achieve what loud threats never could. The third keynote centers on the idea that one person can change everything. And this principle is powerfully illustrated through the actions of Madison Clark at Betty's Diner. In the midst of escalating violence, when 5 bikers aggressively harassed and assaulted Jessica Martinez, the young waitress, the other patrons froze in fear. The businessman closed his laptop. The truck driver hunched over his coffee. The elderly couple remained paralyzed in their seats, and the family quietly edged toward the exit. Each individual was caught between fear and indecision, unwilling to intervene, hoping that someone else might act or that the situation would resolve itself without their involvement. Their inaction created an environment where the bikers' intimidation escalated unchecked. This moment emphasizes the fragility of normalcy and the way power can flourish in the absence of intervention. The bikers relied on the silence of bystanders, their aggressive behavior reinforced by the lack of resistance around them. Every crude remark, every physical boundary crossed, was amplified by the implicit permission granted by the frozen witnesses. It was in this precise moment of danger, when inaction prevailed, that Madison Clark stepped into the scenario. Her entrance into the center of the diner, calm, deliberate, and confident, immediately shifted the dynamics of the situation. She moved with purpose, not rushed, not chaotic, but calculated, observing the positions of each aggressor, assessing the environment, and planning her engagement. The bikers initially perceived her as another potential victim or a non-threatening individual, underestimating her entirely because of her unassuming appearance. This misjudgment was the crucial factor that allowed one person to change everything. Madison's first interaction with Derek Connors, the apparent leader of the bikers, exemplifies how a single individual can transform the trajectory of events. Her verbal warning, delivered in a calm, conversational tone, carried the weight of authority without the need for aggression. The bikers, confident in their control, laughed and mocked her, failing to recognize the quiet strength she embodied. The subsequent physical confrontation demonstrated that the presence of one trained, decisive individual could neutralize multiple threats in seconds. Madison systematically incapacitated each biker using precise techniques honed over 12 years in Delta Force. She relied on leverage, control, and targeting vulnerable points rather than brute force, turning the bikers' aggression against them. In less than a minute, 5 dangerous men, previously believed to hold power over the diner and its patrons, was subdued. The impact of one person acting decisively is further reinforced in the psychological effect her intervention had on the witnesses. The businessman, truck driver, elderly couple, and others who had initially frozen were now confronted with a demonstration that action was possible, that courage could overcome fear, and that inaction was not inevitable. Her example reframed their understanding of the situation, showing that even when the majority hesitates, a single individual's courage can disrupt the balance of power. This disruption extended beyond the immediate physical confrontation. By asserting control and presenting her identity as a former Delta Force operative, Madison established authority in a manner that ensured compliance from the bikers until law enforcement arrived. One person's knowledge, training, And decisiveness created a ripple effect that not only protected Jessica, but also prevented further harm to anyone in the diner. The consequences of Madison's intervention also highlight the long-term impact one person can have. Her actions allowed law enforcement to arrive on scene and take control of the situation without additional violence. Security footage and witness statements corroborated the events, leading to the arrest and conviction of the bikers. Jessica, who had initially been a victim, was empowered by Madison's actions, gaining the courage to speak in court and later pursue self-defense training. Madison's influence extended further, inspiring Jessica to consider a path in military service, demonstrating that the impact of one person's intervention can resonate across time, shaping lives and creating new agents of courage and protection. The story at Betty's Diner shows that one individual, through decisiveness, skill, and courage, can fundamentally alter the course of events. The bikers' dominance was dismantled not by a collective uprising or external forces, but by the calculated, calm intervention of a single person who refused to allow harm to continue. This principle underscores the broader truth that even when circumstances seem hopeless, one person's willingness to act can shift the balance, change outcomes, and inspire others to recognize their own potential for courage. Madison Clark's intervention is a testament to the transformative power of a single person, demonstrating that in moments of crisis, one individual can indeed change everything. The fourth keynote emphasizes that justice begins with witnesses who speak, and this concept is central to the events following the attack at Betty's Diner. The initial scene shows how fear and uncertainty can paralyze ordinary people, rendering them passive observers in the face of wrongdoing. The diners, confronted with the aggressive behavior of the 5 bikers, initially chose silence and inaction. The businessman closed his laptop and left the diner. The truck driver kept his eyes on his coffee, and the elderly couple remained seated, visibly distressed but unable to intervene. The family quietly exited, protecting their children but refraining from confronting the attackers. This collective silence provided the bikers with an environment where they could escalate their harassment without immediate consequences. They measured their power against the lack of resistance, and in doing so, they acted with increasing confidence. The immediate violence against Jessica Martinez, the young waitress, was enabled by this hesitation. Her pleas for help went unanswered. Her struggles met with either avoidance or ineffectiveness from the bystanders. The initial failure to act demonstrated a universal truth. Wrongdoing can flourish when witnesses remain silent. It is only when someone steps forward that the balance begins to shift. Madison Clark's decisive intervention disrupted the bikers' control, protecting Jessica from further assault and ending the immediate threat. However, the broader concept of justice required more than the physical removal of danger. The bikers' actions had legal and social consequences that could only be realized if evidence and testimony were provided. After the confrontation, witnesses began to emerge from their initial fear, inspired in part by Madison's actions and the visible vulnerability of the aggressors. Tom Henderson, the diner's manager, held up a USB drive containing security footage, understanding that the visual evidence would corroborate the events that had transpired. The elderly couple, Mr. and Mrs. Patterson, admitted that they had initially been paralyzed by fear but were now willing to provide statements. Mr. Patterson, a retired judge, acknowledged his own hesitation and expressed the need to act now by speaking the truth. The truck driver, who had remained silent during the incident, also came forward, acknowledging his inaction and committing to providing testimony. Each witness played a critical role in ensuring that justice could be served. Their statements, combined with the security footage, created a comprehensive account of the assault, harassment, and intimidation that had occurred. This accumulation of evidence demonstrated that the legal system relies not only on law enforcement but also on the willingness of witnesses to step forward and provide their accounts. The courtroom proceedings further underscored the importance of testimony. Jessica Martinez, once a victim, was empowered to speak, describing her experience and the fear she had endured. Her testimony, supported by other witnesses and video evidence, created an undeniable record that could not be dismissed. The district attorney built an airtight case, leveraging the combined weight of witness statements and recorded proof to ensure accountability. The bikers, who had felt untouchable in the diner, were confronted with the consequences of their actions, culminating in convictions, prison sentences, and restraining orders. The story demonstrates that the presence of witnesses alone is insufficient. It is the act of speaking, documenting, and reporting that transforms observation into justice. Without the testimonies, the bikers might have claimed the narrative, obscuring their crimes and potentially continuing their predatory behavior elsewhere. The willingness of the witnesses to break their initial silence, to acknowledge the truth, and to support the victim ensured that the system could function as intended. Moreover, the ripple effects of speaking out extended beyond the courtroom. Jessica, inspired by the courage and support around her, pursued self-defense training and considered a military path, demonstrating that accountability and justice empower individuals to reclaim agency in their lives. The story highlights that justice is not passive. It requires active participation from those who witness wrongdoing, a willingness to face discomfort, and the courage to provide accurate accounts. Each statement, each piece of evidence, transforms what could have been a moment of unpunished crime into a narrative of accountability and consequence. The events at Betty's Diner illustrate that witnesses who speak are not merely observers. They are agents of justice. Their voices, combined with actionable evidence, create the foundation upon which legal and social accountability rests. Without their willingness to testify, the bikers' actions might have gone unpunished, reinforcing the destructive power of silence. The narrative demonstrates that for justice to be realized, witnesses must act, transforming fear and hesitation into documentation, testimony, and truth. It is this collective willingness to speak that ensures wrongdoing does not go unchallenged, allowing victims to reclaim safety and society to uphold accountability. The fifth keynote explores how courage is contagious and how one act of bravery can inspire others to act, creating a ripple effect that extends far beyond the initial moment of heroism. This principle is exemplified in the events at Betty's Diner through the actions of Madison Clark and the subsequent transformations of those around her. When the five bikers entered the diner, the atmosphere was immediately charged with fear. The patrons froze, unable to intervene, and the waitress, Jessica Martinez, became the direct target of escalating harassment. For several moments, it seemed as though the aggressors had complete control, exploiting the paralysis of bystanders to assert dominance. The power of intimidation relied not only on their physical presence, but on the assumption that no one would challenge them. The moment Madison Clark decided to act marked the beginning of a chain reaction. Her calm, deliberate movements and decisive intervention demonstrated that fear could be confronted and overcome. By physically neutralizing the threat posed by the bikers, she created a visible, undeniable example of courage in action. Her presence altered the dynamic within the diner, and the immediate effects were profound. Jessica, who had been paralyzed by fear, witnessed firsthand that someone cared enough to intervene. That help was not only possible but effective. The shift in perception was dramatic. What had seemed hopeless transformed into a scenario where survival and protection were achievable. The impact of Madison's bravery extended beyond the physical resolution of the threat. The diners who had initially frozen were now confronted with the tangible reality that courage could exist in the midst of danger. The elderly couple, the truck driver, and the manager had all been passive, restrained by fear and uncertainty. Observing Madison's confident and effective action allowed them to reassess their own capacity for moral agency. Her actions illuminated the potential for ordinary people to act when circumstances demand, even if their contributions are initially small. The psychological effect of witnessing courage cannot be understated. Humans are deeply influenced by social modeling, and seeing one individual confront danger successfully creates a perception that action is possible. Madison's intervention demonstrated that skill, decisiveness, and calm can overcome threats that seem insurmountable. This observation planted seeds of empowerment in those who had been passive. In the aftermath, The ripple effect of Madison's courage continued to unfold. The patrons who had initially frozen began to step forward to provide statements to law enforcement, overcoming their fear and taking responsibility to ensure justice was served. Their testimony, influenced by witnessing Madison's actions, transformed their experience from passive observation to active participation in accountability. Jessica Martinez herself, inspired by Madison, found the strength to testify in court, confront the trauma she had endured, and advocate for her own protection. The courage she had observed in Madison became a model for her own actions, allowing her to transform from victim to empowered individual. This transformation did not stop there. Jessica's experience and subsequent decisions exemplify how courage can propagate to future generations. Motivated by the bravery she had witnessed, she enrolled in self-defense courses and contemplated joining the military, aspiring to become someone capable of protecting herself and others. Madison's actions had demonstrated the tangible impact that one person could have, and Jessica internalized that lesson, allowing it to shape her own life trajectory. The broader implications of this contagious courage are evident in the community response. The initial hesitation and silence gave way to collective action, accountability, and moral clarity. Witnesses who had previously frozen were emboldened to speak out. Law enforcement was able to act with certainty, and the bikers faced the consequences of their actions. Each individual's willingness to engage, prompted by the example of courage in action, reinforced the principle that bravery inspires bravery, even beyond the immediate incident. Madison's intervention created a narrative that would persist along Route 66. Stories of the blonde woman who stopped 5 bikers in less than a minute became legend, influencing the perceptions and behaviors of those who heard it. The knowledge that courage exists, that ordinary individuals can act decisively in extraordinary circumstances, became part of a cultural memory, encouraging vigilance, self-protection, and moral responsibility. The narrative demonstrates that courage is not a static quality but a catalyst. It propagates through observation, interaction, and emulation. One person's bravery can dismantle immediate threats, empower victims, inspire witnesses to act, and influence future generations to embody similar principles. Madison Clark's actions show that heroism is contagious, not because it is flashy or ostentatious, but because it is real, effective, and grounded in skill, discipline, and moral clarity. The events at Betty's Diner exemplify the transformative power of a single courageous individual to create widespread, enduring impact, proving that acts of bravery can resonate far beyond their initial moment, inspiring a ripple effect of courage, empowerment, and moral responsibility in others.